Hello fellow bibliophiles, and welcome back to Blatantly Bookish. I'm Marissa, and today I would like to chat all about the book, The Heiress, The Revelations of Anne de Bourgh by Molly Greeley. This book has been on my radar since it first came out in January, but what better time to read it and talk about it than in Jane Austen July. The Heiress tells Anne's story in first person, beginning in early childhood and spanning the entirety of her life. Greeley chooses to define Anne's illness as opioid addiction. As a fussy, colicky baby, Anne is prescribed laudanum to quiet her. She grows up sheltered, confined, and protected in Rosings Park, taking the daily dose of laudanum that keeps her slender and stupefied. After her father passes away, a seed of an idea planted by her governess takes root in her brain. What if there is more to her reality than a life of fragility? What if the very medicine that she's been told she can't live without is the cause of her sickness and suffering? Desperate to discover the truth for herself, Anne discards her laudanum and flees to London, to her cousin, Colonel John Fitzwilliam. After dealing with the harrowing symptoms of opioid withdrawal, Anne is ready to forge her own identity, tackle London society and subsequent romantic entanglements, face her domineering and manipulative mother, and take her place as heiress of Rosings Park. Like so many Austen retellings or adaptations, The Heiress aims to bring an obscured female character's story to light. The idea to bring Anne de Bourgh to the forefront of a Regency story is fantastic. She's certainly underexplored in Pride and Prejudice. She's engaged to Mr. Darcy from birth, but obviously that doesn't go as planned, and as such, we can't help but view Anne in comparison to Lizzie Bennet. In many ways, they are foils for one another. Lizzie is full of wit and personality, but her class status and marriage prospects are precarious. She's not entitled to land or wealth, and the entail on Longbourn casts a shadow over her whole family. Anne, on the other hand, is sickly, demure, and under the thumb of her demanding parent. Lady Catherine de Bourgh is a force to be reckoned with. Can you imagine having her as a mother? Personality-wise, Anne is barely a character in Pride and Prejudice, a point which is made abundantly clear in The Heiress through a young Mr. Darcy's perception of her. But despite Anne's lack of charisma or ability to carry on a stimulating conversation, Anne's future is secure, unlike that of Lizzie's. She is promised to Darcy in marriage from birth and is destined to unite their two immensely wealthy and expansive estates. But even without that destiny, Anne is set for life. She is still vastly wealthy and can inherit Rosings Park in her own right. She has no need to marry if she doesn't want to. Anne's chief difficulties, in fact, are her domineering mother and her debilitating and unspecified chronic illness. This places her in a rather unique situation for a Regency woman, and the idea to write a book focused on these themes is nothing short of genius. I personally always thought that Anne's condition was something genetic or autoimmune, maybe sickle cell or anemia, and I always thought that a large part of her overly reserved personality and social awkwardness was not just about her chronic illness, but was in large part due to her mother's overbearing nature. I think there's even been speculation about Munchausen by proxy in some Austen circles. Regardless, I think that it's fascinating to propose laudanum dependence as Anne's ailment. Laudanum is an opioid that was very easy to come by in the time period and often given to babies, particularly upper-class babies, to quiet them in their infancy. Opioid use and addiction must have been a really prevalent aspect of society, and it's explored in later works of literature, most famously and obviously Sherlock Holmes. Personally, I cannot wait to reread Pride and Prejudice and assess the compatibility of opioid addiction with Anne's mysterious illness. The two highlights of this book for me were Greeley's depictions of Anne's opioid-induced stupors and her portrayal of Lady Catherine de Bourgh. It's amazing the way Greeley's writing suddenly drifts off from reality to the poetic interiority of Anne de Bourgh's drugged mind. One of my favorite opioid-induced sections is when Dr. Grant increases her dose of laudanum, and Anne describes these really terrifying nighttime visitors and goes on to explain how Rosings Park communicates with her and breathes with her. At night, the house breathed, and it was this that made me realize I had been hearing and feeling Rosings Park for most of my life. I remembered when I was a child imagining that the walls of the house were moving in and out around me, just as my own ribcage expanded and subsided with each of my breaths. It had, I now knew, been breathing the whole time. I simply had not recognized its respiration for what it was. Night was the only time now that Rosings Park was quiet. During the day, it never stopped talking, never ceased worrying over its every stone, both those that made up the building itself. There was a damp running down some of the inner walls, apparently, and slick green things taking advantage, clinging to the stones' rough texture. And those that lay in the fields outside, silent, chuckling to themselves, just waiting to make the plow horses stumble. I wondered sometimes whether it used to nudge Papa as it nudged me. Now I had inherited its cares and worries. I thought of it sometimes like a cat that twined about its mistress's legs, butted its small head against its mistress's hand, intent on getting the attention it needed. At night, though, I could relax back into the mattress, breathing in time with the house. Only sometimes was my rest disturbed, when the house muttered something or cried out weakly like a kitten. Rosings Park, it seemed, sometimes had bad dreams, too. Yeah, so that's just one of the really lovely passages that are plentiful in this book. There's a lot of lovely writing about the way the opioids work in Anne's body and the kinds of thoughts that she has while under the influence of them. Like I said, the portrayal of Lady Catherine de Bourgh is also phenomenal. She is such a domineering, manipulative, and controlling woman, and is perfectly recognizable from Pride and Prejudice in the first half of The Heiress. Then, in the second half of The Heiress, Greeley depicts Lady Catherine's reaction to Anne running off to London and Anne's recovery and newfound self-sufficiency. It's a perfect and fascinating way for Lady Catherine to react in such circumstances, and Anne's later interactions with her mother are only strengthened by the faithful representations of Lady Catherine early on in this book. The Heiress depicts Lady Catherine's control issues with Anne, as you might expect, but it also delves into Lady Catherine's idea of motherhood and a rationale for why she acts as she does with respect to Anne. Personally, I struggle with the sincerity of Lady Catherine's rationale, but that's what's so brilliant about this portrayal of Lady Catherine. It encourages the reader to think about her character further and consider why Lady Catherine is the way she is. Could she possibly contain a warmer, more maternal side beneath her commanding and manipulative exterior? And if not, what does actually drive her personality? I also love the attention that this book brings to Lady Catherine's thoughts on music and female accomplishments. This is a topic that Claudia from Spinster's Library loves to think about and has even addressed on her channel, I believe. But she also shared an essay on the topic with me recently, which is all about Lady Catherine and how she's intensely hypocritical when it comes to the idea of female accomplishment and class. Lady Catherine has this idea that women of upper classes are inherently knowledgeable about music and possess this innate musical talent, even if they've never so much as touched an instrument. And yet ladies of birth and fortune don't need musical accomplishments to secure a husband. So Molly Greeley definitely brings our attention to this aspect of marriage in Pride and Prejudice, and these thoughts relate to her later conversations of marriage and accomplishments, and even Anne's future in interesting ways. Overall, The Heiress was an intriguing and fun read. I loved its insights into opioid addiction, marriage, and inheritance in the time period. But there's something about the overall execution of this book that just didn't entirely work for me. It's just not a perfectly polished and cohesive narrative. I think that Greeley could have explored the themes more deeply and used the fourth section / the last chapter to tie the book together more seamlessly. Right now, my standards for Austen retellings and adaptations are ridiculously high following the publication of Miss Austen and the other Bennet sister. As far as I can tell, other people didn't have the same concerns that I do about the overall impact and execution of this book. Some people seem to mention that the pacing was a bit off, but it has a ton of 5-star ratings. And don't get me wrong, there are a whole lot of 5-star moments in here. Moments of brilliance and incredible insight. But as a whole, I can envision a more perfect version of this book. And as long as I have that vision in my mind's eye, I can't help but wish for something more than the Heiress provided. Still, if you love Jane Austen, or you're a fan of Pride and Prejudice, or you like spin-offs of Austen like the other Bennet sister, I would highly, highly recommend that you read this one. It doesn't have to be a perfect book to be a ton of fun or to shed some new insights into Pride and Prejudice, and this book was truly a very entertaining and engaging read. So that is all I have for you guys today. If you've read The Heiress, I'd love to hear your thoughts about it in the comments down below. If you have not read The Heiress, do you think you will in the near future? I would love to hear any of your thoughts about Lady Catherine or Anne or any of the other themes, topics, and characters mentioned in this review. Until next time, I look forward to seeing you all in another, hopefully Jane Austen related video very soon. Bye!